Hello, and welcome back to episode 8 of Go Forth Podcast. I have the utmost privilege to be your host. My name is Tiffany Nicole White. Little bit about me if you don't know already. I'm born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Shout out to 05. I'm 22 years old, and there's just a whole lot about me in more ways than one. Today is March 3rd, but this will be posted on March 7th if it goes as planned, if it's the Lord's will. But yeah, so before we get into any more details, I believe in sowing. When you put seed into the ground, the word of God says it will, when you give unto men, it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, so that men may give into your bosom. So the greatest producer in the entire world, Rodney, is going to put those on the screen. I record every single time at BGTV Studios, where Brad is the owner, and he is absolutely amazing in just the work that he has put into the vision to make this possible for so many different people, including myself. It is not something that I do take for granted, so I do honor him greatly. And then mine as well, if the Lord leads you to do so. So, like I said, it will most likely be uploaded on March 7th. March 7th is 3 years since I unfortunately lost my biological mother to a fentanyl overdose. And today, I don't believe, okay, so let's break this down. Tiffany, if you know a little bit, Tiffany does not believe in coincidences. Fun fact, there's no such word as coincidence in the Hebrew language. So I'm just not big on coincidences. I think that every single thing that God does is intentional. He has a reason for everything, big, small, in between, in the middle, especially with his timeline and how things work. It's been said a little bit. If you did not know, I got connected to BGTV Studios and Brad through my good friend, Jessica Smith, who hosts Just Ask the Podcast. And I was a guest on her podcast. And then that led me to connect. And God just opened the door for me to start hosting my own podcast. Before we get any deeper, I also want to acknowledge some people have said this. Some people, have just messaged me. And I know it's all in good intention. But some people are like, Tiffany, you said you were going to post weekly, and I've been looking forward to it. And this, that, and the third, which I do recognize. One, I take accountability. Life has been lifing. Two, God has just convicted me and put me in a place of, if he's given me nothing to say, I'm simply not just going to open my mouth. February, I barely posted anything. I think I had my Galentine's event as well as one other assignment in West Palm Beach, Florida. But that was the weekend before. But other than that, God has just told me this month specifically was just a lot that's going on behind the scenes with me to shut up. And so just sit and listen and soak, be a student, and that's the posture that I have been in. So yeah, there's so many people that I could recommend, but at the very end of the day, it's so important when topics like this come up to realize that the only idol or role model or main pour that you receive from should simply be Jesus and Jesus alone. I love my pastor, I love my church, but at the very end of the day, if I only eat on Sundays, I will starve. So it's so important for us as just Christians, as believers, to have a personal relationship with Christ, that we get fed no matter who doesn't post, who doesn't say this, who doesn't preach, no matter if we skip church and don't go in person, whatever the case may be, because at the very end of the day, you have to answer for yourself. And are you going to hear, well done, thy good and faithful servant? I never want to miss the mark. I never want to drop the assignment. And I have a big mantle and responsibility for all that I do carry and the many hats that I do wear. But at the very end of the day, I simply just want to point people to Jesus, not Tiffany or my face or anything like that in any way, shape, or form. Because if it wasn't for God, none of this at all would be possible. So I just wanted to get that little disclaimer out of the way. Another disclaimer as well before I introduce my amazing guest for today's podcast is there will be discussions of sensitive topics in this podcast. It's probably not going to be, sunshine and rainbows and happy and giddy and all the things. But like I was saying, the intentionality of God, I connected with Brad and BGTV Studios and launched my own podcast, as well as a few episodes in, at least 4. We made the connection, me and the producer Rodney, that he actually knew my biological mom for a hot minute, and I'll let him tell the story better than I can. But yeah, so there will probably be mention of, addiction, drugs, alcoholism, things of that nature. So if that may be something that's a sensitive topic or whatever the case may be, please pray and let the Lord lead you accordingly. Don't put yourself in a position that could cause you to backslide or be triggered or whatever the case may be. But yeah, my expectations for this, because me and Rodney really have not talked much about what he knows, what about what could, possibly be said. And if I'm truthfully honest, I have put it off for a hot minute because we discovered this in, what was that, early December?
I believe it was before Christmas.
Yeah, it was before Christmas. So it's been 3 months, a quarter of a year. But yeah, I've just transparently put it off in the sense of there was so long that I did not have certain answers about my mom, and I had become comfortable with the unknown of not knowing. And I guess we could say the delusion of what I thought that those answers might be. So it is a very sensitive topic for Tiffany. I'm very open about my entire testimony, but this is a door that has been closed for a very long time. I mean, it's only been almost 3 years, but still. There's a lot that's still being grieved and processed through. And the biggest part of grief for me in this topic of losing my mother was the grief of what ifs or not having this or the missed memories, not necessarily the grief of the relationship that I had with her, because we really didn't have a stable one. And especially not for, I only had contact with my mom for maybe 5 years on and off before she passed away. So there wasn't really much there. So now that that is out of the way, but my expectation for this one is just God to have his way and be glorified regardless. 2, for freedom of a lot of the unknowns and just the fear of not wanting to know certain things. And then 3, for awareness to be brought around the topic of addiction, as well as a beautiful testimony that has came out of that and has continued to bless the lives of many. And to remind you that just because, you come from something does not mean that you have to stay there, or you don't have to repeat the pattern or the generational curse, because the blood of Jesus still works, and I'm a living witness. So before I start crying, I have my tissues. But my guest for today, might as well be. My guest for today is my amazing producer that I brag on every single week, or every single episode, and his name is Rodney, and we love him.
Hello.
Yes. So why don't you just introduce yourself? Who is Rodney?
My name's Rodney. I'm a producer here at BGTV. Known Brad for a while and ended up meeting Tiffany for the first time here at the studio when she came on. I was actually here the day
with Jessica. I was with Jessica.
And then you came back a week or so later and met with Brad, and I was here then as well. Mm-hmm. So that's how we actually met each other, but found out later that I've known of Tiffany for 22 years.
My whole life.
Yeah.
Longer than I've known of me.
Yeah. So I guess it's an awesome story, really, testimony, just how it happened.
Yeah.
So, like you said, 3rd or 4th show in, and I've produced all of your shows. Has anybody else done any of your shows?
It's just been you. My OG, my ride or die.
So the first few shows just kind of laying the groundwork and all that, but then you got into one of your shows, and I don't even know if that show has aired. Did you ever air your
I
own?
never did, no.
Well, we did.
Y'all did, but I did.
So it's
I didn't.
There.
I think it was supposed to be.
You can find it on BTTV.
Yeah. I think it was episode 5 or 6, because now we're on. This is 8. So I want to say it was like 5 or 6. I don't
trust
know.
You on that one.
I remember what I was wearing, what I looked like, all of the things.
So, but in that show, you got into more details about your early life and how you were growing up. And I'm just sitting here. It's just another show, and you're just another show host. Not, no offense to any of the hosts if you're watching this. I love you all, and I appreciate everybody what you bring. But I was just recording, but I always listen. And she said a few things that really didn't say anything. But then all of a sudden she said what her name at birth given by her biological mother was.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, my name at birth was Jocelyn.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here and I said, Jocelyn. So she's still talking. I'm over here doing math. I'm going through my phone. And it hit me. I know who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm literally, while she's doing the show, has no idea. I'm over here crying and, just crying, tearing up, saying, no way, going, what is going on? This is not possible. This is the craziest thing I've ever experienced in my life. So after the show, when we hit finish, she was done recording. I just looked at her and I said, I want to ask you a question.
Mind you, we had just literally stopped recording. And all of a sudden, Rodney asked me a question. I'm like, oh, God, here we go.
I said, was your birth mother's name Becky?
And I just bust out crying.
She dropped her head, started crying. I dropped my head and started crying. And that was confirmation that she was who I suspected that she was.
Mm-hmm.
And I proceeded to tell her how I knew who she was and how I knew her mother. And we didn't get very far that first night because it was just like, whoa
it was a
big
big door that was opened.
So, but man, that's just, I don't believe in coincidence either,
Mm-hmm.
Tiffany. I don't, because God is sovereign. There's no such thing as
Mm-hmm.
chance. God's in control. So it's his will. It was
Right.
his desire. It was his purpose. It was his plan for you to come here, for me to be here. And God serves a lot of purposes. He's got one stone that can kill a lot of birds, right?
Right.
So, but that's one of them. I believe that it was his plan for us to meet, because I loved your mother. We had a long, 20-year, not romantic relationship, but friendship. We went through, it started out in addiction, but we became very close and cared about each other until the end. And so, all of her children, they're important to me. And I probably have more of a relationship with you than I do her other children at this point. So I'm grateful for it, and I look forward to what God can do with it in the future. And it's just from that moment, knowing that when I hear you come and do your shows and the topics that you discuss and the wisdom that you portray and that God has given you, it's just a blessing to me. And I know that your mother's proud. I know you're all of your mothers. You've been blessed with some spiritual mothers, and adopted mothers, and birth mothers, but I know that she's proud, and I have confidence that she knew the Lord.
Yeah.
We can get into all that, and nobody knows for sure, but I'm confident. I can say I'm confident.
Yeah.
So, and I know that you have questions, and I'll try and answer anything you want to know. I don't want to tell you anything you don't want to know. But I probably have some answers to the questions you might have. So.
Well, I don't have a script. I really tried my absolute best. I was like, I'm going to cancel. And then I was like, no, Tiffany, you cannot do that. Because I have been putting this off for so long. 3 months is a hot minute. And I'm just like, okay, rip off the Band-Aid. And with just it being 3 years, which is just crazy to me that it has been 3 years. I think back to who I was 3 years ago when I got that phone call, to even when I had first discovered who my sisters were, my biological sisters, and then the first day I ever met my biological mom that I can remember, and just the different phases of life that God has brought me through and that I have evolved and grown from. But in particular, me 3 years ago to me today, two completely different people, because it was really, I was already going down a wrongful path in my life. I was 19 years old when she passed away, but it was her death that really sent me into a complete spiral of just a whole lot of unhealthy behaviors, alcoholism, just acting out, acting a fool, just doing things that I had absolutely zero business doing, which is the complete opposite of what she would have wanted. But it's how I acted out of rebellion and just sin and fleshly desires. And then it almost took just it like that. So the topic of grief. So my biological mother let's put this out there also. Tiffany does not know who her biological father is. Okay? Nobody has any idea. I've tried Ancestry DNA, doesn't work. Nobody pops up. My mom.
And of all the questions you have, that's the one that I can't answer either.
Yeah, no. Like, nobody knows. Literally nobody. And my mom really didn't even know when she was alive. I mean, in all transparency, she gave me a name when I was 17 years old. I found his number. I called him. He stated he didn't know my mom, never been married, never had any kids, and to leave him alone. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Like, that's just that. And I never tried to reach out since then. I've like checked in and stuff and like looked on his name or like looked up his Facebook profile and stuff. But like, I have no idea if that man is my dad. And I mean, same thing with just avoiding it. I just don't think, at least not right now, would be a good time for me to try to reopen that door. But in the sense of my mom dying, like that was I mean, like I said, she had a father who was my grandfather, who I met twice. And I was there when he actually passed. And I was like, I just turned 15. And that was like the first experience of like true grief in the sense of like I could actually process like what was going on. Because before that, we had like family friends who had unfortunately passed away. I had an aunt who passed away when I was younger in my adolescence. But me being 15, I kind of understood. And then also with me being there to witness it, it was a whole nother thing. But the first true experience of grief in the sense of physically losing a person to death was my biological mom. And this was before I had like recommitted my life to Christ, got back in the church, all of the things. So I was already on a path to premature death, if we're just going to call a spade. But that just opened the door to so much. And I don't blame her for that. And a lot of the healing and stuff that I've had to do over the past 2.5 years now, or even 3 since she had died, was understanding addiction as well as deconstructing this false ideology that I had and just misconception around it. Because I struggled with alcohol. I never struggled with drugs because I, like to this day even, and even growing up, I never took medicine. I hated taking medicine. I don't even like now taking ibuprofen or like Tylenol or anything, because although I'm well aware it's very unlikely to get addicted to ibuprofen and Tylenol, but with just the sensitive topic of my mom, and I know it runs in the family and all of the things, and me being most like her personality-wise, or, you know, people that have been around us have said, and even her when she was alive has said, well, Tiffany, you just act most like me. And I'm like, that's kind of scary. Yeah. But yeah, just like being a child trying to process so many different emotions to now being an adult and her not being here, having to process so much grief and anger and sadness and regret and, you know, what ifs and missed opportunities and just all the things of not even understanding. Because I grew up already with imposter syndrome and just this false identity because I didn't know where I came from. I didn't know like the family that I was biologically born into. I didn't know anything. I knew I was adopted. And then my parents had told me like her name was Becky and she had blonde hair and that I had some sisters. That was it. That was all.
And she was promiscuous.
Huh?
Didn't you tell me and she was promiscuous?
Oh, yeah, baby. They were clear on that. Like, they were very clear. But, like, it would be to the point, and I look back on things now, I didn't understand then how much they affected me. But, like, I would be 5, 6 years old in a grocery store, and if I saw a woman with blonde hair who looked like a Becky, like, I would go, like, hey, is your name Becky? And looking back at that as an adult now, as a child, I'm innocent. I'm not, you know, knowing any better, or maybe just don't even know how to process those emotions and put them into words. So then I acted out of rebellion. But looking back now, that's so, like, that is heartbreaking for me.
It is.
And I once again, I don't blame her. You know, there was a lot going on that I still don't know, probably a lot that I will never know. And just the sense of addiction, I have never understood from a drug point of view.
Well, it's some drugs and drug addiction, alcohol addiction
Yeah.
are are similar because they both control you.
Right.
And they take over, and you don't really have no will of your own.
Right.
So in that sense, they're the same.
Yeah.
You know, the pathway to get to that control is different, but the end result is the same.
Right.
So don't get caught up too much on the difference between alcohol and drugs.
Yeah. So yeah. It's not funny. I just, but
well, there's so you're naturally speaking, the deck was stacked against you from the day you were born.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just naturally speaking, it was.
Yeah.
Anytime that there's, adoption, God's will, if we're going to speak from a faith perspective, God's will is for children to be with their parents, their mother and their father. I mean, that's his design. That's what he wanted. So anytime you start without that, then you're already fighting an uphill battle. And then you find out, like you said, the little bit that you knew about your biological mother, and it wasn't necessarily pretty. And then when you finally do meet, so I mean, it's just throughout your childhood, these things are compounding, and they're compounding and compounding. And then you finally meet her and reconnect with her and find out even more truth about her past and how she was. And then you're dealing with, okay, because I can imagine, you can tell me because I've never been in this situation, but I bet growing up, you fantasize in your mind that there was probably a good reason that she gave you up. That it was more than just what they were saying. It really wasn't that bad. And then you find out it was that bad and worse, right? So you deal with abandonment all over again, and then you're not understanding and probably went through resentment and anger. You can imagine you went through the whole gambit of emotions while she was still alive.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
It would. I mean, and there's people who were in my life at that time, as well as my sisters when I talked to them. Because we all have, let me say this also. Tiffany speaks about my biological mother from Tiffany's point of view. I love and I honor and I appreciate my two older biological sisters. We're half sisters. We all have different dads, but the same mom. But I also honor the fact that we all had different relationships with our mom. They grew up, they were adopted by family and kept in the family and grew up, around her and all the things. I was put into the system. I was 8 days old. Well, I was born addicted to cocaine, but I was 8 days old when I was placed into the foster care system and placed with my now adopted family. So we have two or three, because there's three of us, completely different perspectives on our mom and just grief and all of the things. So like the difference with me, even when she was still alive, was one, I was having to grieve somebody that was still alive and not ever knowing when I was going to get that call. Lord forbid I got that call, which I ended up getting. She had unfortunately overdosed. But also from the sense of like, I didn't understand like why me, of like why I was put into the system, or like why nobody else in the family. And there's other details as well to solidify that I will not go into detail too much about, just because they're still alive and well, and I mean no harm or no disrespect or anything. But I was never accepted, and still to this day have not been accepted by my distant biological family. Like besides my Mimi, who was my mom's mom, who passed a year before my mom did in March of 2021, and then my mom passed in March of 2022. Mimi and my mom were like the only two, besides my sisters, obviously, but like other people in the family who really like took the time to get to know me. Like I used to just show up to my Mimi's house because I could drive at this point. I was 16. I would show up, and unfortunately she was dealing with grief on her own of her husband of 50 years, which I can never imagine that. That would, Lord knows, he could be the only reason that I could ever get through something like that. But I mean, and it was just a lot. Like, they were the only two that really, had my back through it all. And there was just a lot. Even when my biological grandfather passed away, like, it was a problem that I was included on the obituary as a grandchild. Like, I was a child. I had no control over where I went or who was my mother or her choices. And unfortunately, I was the punching bag of it all as a child. And then when my Mimi passed away, Amaya was born at that point. And once again, it was a problem that she was included as a great-grandchild. And I'm like, I have no idea. And I mean, I'm at peace with that. I have forgiven them. A lot of the stuff I don't take personal because I know that we don't wage war with flesh and blood.
Right.
But I mean, it was like you said, the cards were just stacked against me just because of who my mom was or who people misunderstood my mom to be. Because at the very end of the day, we can both agree on this, I believe. She had a very big heart.
Absolutely.
And because of just things that she went through from a very early age, cards were stacked against her as well. I mean, she was, from what I can gather from the documents that I have seen, of just like a mental evaluation, my foster care files, some of those with DHR and just reports, and her criminal history and stuff like that I've been able to see. I mean, she was misunderstood. She was an outcast. She was the black sheep of the family. And then here comes Tiffany, outcast, blackest sheep of the family, like misunderstood all of the things my whole life. And I acted out of rebellion, as did she for majority of her life. But for me, because I can't speak for her, but for me, it was, I never got that one-on-one attention or understanding or that safe place to communicate some of my emotions. And I don't blame my adopted parents. I've made that very clear anytime this is brought up. They did the best that they could with the capacity that they have. And they do watch this, so hello, I love you. But I'm also not going to limit at the sole fact of their feelings might be hurt, because the truth is the truth. How I feel was valid. We've been through this. We've talked about it. Boundaries have been established. Healing has taken place, and God has graciously, reunified me with my relationship with my adopted parents, because it was very broken for a hot minute of time. And a lot of the reason of that was the topic around my biological mother. But yeah, like, they, as much had went on or that she had done, they really never spoke against her or like down on her from a sense of her character. It was just more so her choices or what she was going through at that time, which you can't blame a parent for. I mean, when I had got connected with her, I was 13, 14, and
I mean, their base intention was to protect you.
Right, that was their job. Yeah, legally, I wasn't supposed to have contact with her until I was 18 or 19 in the state of Alabama. But, and they also didn't know. They knew what she was doing back then and who she was then, but they didn't know now. And I mean, that was just a big can of worms that was opened at 13, 14 years old. We had talked for almost a year before I ever met her in person. I only convinced my parents of that because my grandfather was very close to passing away, and I wanted to meet him. And my adopted grandfather, well, we're not related by adoption or biological, but my grandfather, my papa, who is my Gamma's husband, he went with me, and my Mimi was there, my pop was there, who was my grandfather, my mom was there, and Caitlin was there. Shelby, I don't believe, was there. But and then my mom's husband at the time was there. But I mean, it was just a lot, because I was under the impression, like you said, it was like heartbreaking abandonment all over again. And I don't blame her for lying, ultimately. She had told me like she was clean and got her life together and this, that, and the third. And then all of a sudden it's blown up in my face, because now very long story short, now she had fessed up to me after I had fully convinced my parents to let me do this and be around her and go to the funeral and all of this. Now it blows up in my face that she comes clean. Like, I'm actually not clean. And, this, that, and the third. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious. Because my parents still had a foster license at that point, and they could have lost it all. One, if somehow, some way, the state would have found out that I was around my biological mother, especially unsupervised. Two, if they found out or something happened to where we were pulled over and there were drugs in the car, which there was, and we're coming back from a funeral. I'm like, what are we doing? We're going back to the house that you've told me that, you do. Because I don't know, and excuse me if it's, an ignorant statement, but the way that I kind of put it into words, because when I tell people like, oh yeah, like my mom was addicted to cocaine and crack, they're like, oh, like when I think of a crackhead, or like when I did in the past before I was educated, like I'm thinking of somebody homeless on the street, like, you know, all the things. My mom was high functioning. I mean, she could take care of herself. She lived in a big old house. If I saw her walking down the street, I would not think like she was an addict.
For what your mother and myself and all of our little clique was.
Okay.
We were hustlers.
Oh, okay, fair.
Right? And she was a very, very good hustler. She could take care of herself. She wasn't going to be homeless on the street.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that to talk bad about her or brag on her. It's just the way it was. It's what we did to survive back then. Yeah. And you know, so let's talk about your mother for a minute. You want to?
Okay. Yeah. So in your point of view and just with your experience, because I feel like we've gotten all the nitty gritty out of the way. Mm-hmm. So now we can just cut to the chase, the real and raw, whatever. To you, who was my mom? Like, how would you describe her in your own words? What was y'all's relationship like? What were the best parts of her? And then, you know, maybe even like her strengths and her weaknesses. Because I don't know a lot.
So we met each other in addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So we were
What year? Or like around what time? Just for time frame.
97, 98, somewhere in there when we initially met. Had the same drug dealer. So
at where?
Same drug dealer.
Oh, okay, period.
Yeah. So that's how we ended up meeting. We crossed paths, you know, connecting with the dealer, and then, you know, friendship developed. And at that point, I don't think you could call it a friendship. It was just a
trauma bond.
Yeah, a trauma bond. So we were both broken, searching for different things, but we were on the same path, and we clicked. You know, you were exactly right. She did have a very big heart, even in addiction. She had a big heart. She had a heart for people, and she would do a lot of things for a lot of people, and I was one of them. She did a lot for me throughout the years, and that's what was having that heart. But with her children, the addiction didn't let her to have, you know, to share that heart with her kids, and you can say, well, we should have stopped getting high. Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many addicts in the world, and that's really easy to say. And people say, well, if you really loved your kids, you wouldn't do what you're doing.
And I had that misconception.
It's not true.
I had that big misconception for so long, up until she passed away.
Yeah. And so we met in 97 or 98.
I was born in 2002. And
within probably within 6 months of meeting her, we were joined at the hip. And then another friend of ours, Tasha, came along, and then we were the three amigos, three musketeers. I mean, we did everything together. So for the next 2 or 3 years, that's until, you know, God got a hold of me and I started trying to do right. And I've been trying to do right for 20 years. You know, the Lord, I'm righteous. I'm the holiness. I'm being holy every day. But what I'm saying is I'm getting tongue-tied here.
You're good.
Because God is good. But so we did everything together. We lived together. We moved together. We got high together. So I was there when Shelby when we lived together, when she was pregnant with Shelby. So through the entire pregnancy, I was there. And after Shelby was born, you know, just she suffered. She really did. And seeing that hurt. And I had, even me being in addiction and not really understanding then, I had the same questions like, man, because I didn't have kids at that time. I'd never been married. You know, it was just me against the world, right? But I would even say, man, that's kind of sorry, you know? But I didn't even understand then. I do now because I have kids now, and to a certain extent, I put my kids through some of the same stuff when they were younger. But God is faithful in that. So it really it destroyed her mentally because she tried to process all of her own internal pain without the Lord.
Yeah.
And that just entailed getting higher, just getting more dope, and that never worked. So it was just this perpetual cycle, you know, that we were all on. But she was a very loving individual. She was very passionate about everything she did.
Everything.
Especially
if it involves an animal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where we're different.
Yeah.
I don't like animals.
Yeah. She loved animals and yeah. So she was passionate about anything that she did. And she was beautiful. You know, I remember just a little I'll share a little story with you. So my father actually knew Becky, and I don't know that you've met Pastor Leslie, who's another host here.
Yeah.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
So he knew your mother as well through me.
Oh, wow.
Because Leslie is one of the ones that ministered and led me to the Lord in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So she being such a big part of my life,
Mm-hmm.
eventually he got to know her as well, and she knew him and thought highly of him. Where was I going with this? Oh, so anyway, just talking about people in my circle that knew your mother as well. Now, obviously, they did not know her anyway in any semblance of as personally as I did. But one time, the first time that my father met your mother, he thought we were dating. And he patted me on the back and he said, "Man,
Attaboy.
she's gorgeous, Attaboy. She's gorgeous." And I told Becky about it, and man, she always, I mean, for years and years and years, she would rib me. She's like, "Your dad thinks I'm hot."
That sounds like her.
Yeah, she loved it. She loved the attention. Now, so we can get on the other side of it. So Becky was always looking for approval, acceptance, attention, love in all the wrong places. And I think you can identify with that just from a little bit of I've heard through your podcast and what I've heard about yourself that you were looking for the same thing. Different reasons, but you were looking for the same thing. And we all look for that acceptance and approval. We're going to seek it from somewhere because it's a base need that we have. But just to hear that, so no, it's like looking at two different people, one knowing Becky and then seeing you, knowing that you were born from her. And man, it just blesses me every time you come on here to see, because you could have had the same story that
if
she
not
had.
worse. Yeah.
Because you were out of your own mouth, you were headed the same way.
Yep.
But God, right?
Yeah.
And even myself, you know, I was on the road with her, but God had mercy on me and he called me out. And you know, there's so many that have the same story that never made it out.
Yeah. And that's another part of it all. Like, with the faithfulness of God, I also had to wrap my mind around, okay, why me? And that was another thing of like, why couldn't have, or being okay with God's will and his timing on how things had come about. Because it wasn't until after my mom passed to where I rededicated, and then it wasn't until after my grandmother passed, my Gamma, not my Mimi, but my Gamma, who I mention frequently. But it wasn't until after she passed that I got involved in active ministry. So then I would have these questions, and that was just a whole thing to process as well, on top of grief of, well, why couldn't any of this happen, you know, while they were here, or things of that nature. But ultimately, you know, I don't believe anything that my mom went through was in vain, because I learned a lot from it. Even just like the little bits and pieces that I did know. Like, I never touched a drug on a habitual basis. You know, I had tried marijuana a few times. That was just never my field or my choice. But anything other than that, never got involved with, just because of I saw what effect it had on her. And I never wanted to go through that or even start that. I mean, I had been around drugs plenty, but there was always that little like voice in the back of my head of, girl, you better not, because you've seen it. Only takes one time. It really only does.
It really does. That's it.
And so I never even wanted to experience that first time. And you know, a lot of times I'll credit my God snatching me up. You know, ultimately I'll talk about me being in the abortion clinic. But it really stems all from, or before that, not really all of it stems, but a big portion before that of just the intentionality of God was, how did I even get to that point, was my biological mom passed away unexpectedly from an overdose. And that was March. I was in the clinic in August.
From a drug she didn't even use.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another day.
Sorry.
No, her drug of choice was cocaine and crack, simple and plain. She really didn't switch it up from what I understand. She was faithful to those two.
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, she went through a divorce with her husband and got around the wrong crowd, which is just 500 million topics that we have conspiracy theories on, whatever, thoughts, opinions, whatever. But, and she overdosed on fentanyl, of all things. And I was just like, there's no way. My mama was an OG in this game. Like, she knew good from bad batches.
Yeah.
And just like, and so I'm like, what? Because it's so bad to say this, but I mean, I was convinced she was never going to overdose. Like, she was invincible to death with drugs.
It's difficult to overdose from cocaine.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Yeah.
But it's difficult.
Yeah. And it was around that time of like 2022. I know fentanyl has been around, but to my understanding with just Birmingham, it was around that time that it had really gotten more popular and like heightened.
Started putting it in everything.
Yeah, and they started cutting batches and all the things.
And you can't, I mean, we're getting into this is real stuff. You can't cook it out. So if you take cocaine that's cut with fentanyl and you cook crack out of it, the fentanyl stays in it. It doesn't cook out.
Yeah.
So then you smoke it and you're smoking fentanyl.
Yeah. And I mean, I've even seen people's marijuana be laced with fentanyl. Like
everything.
Everything.
Every street drug is. Or
everything. Or it's cut with something like rat poisoning, or they'll try to, make it last like just everything. Yeah. It's not like it used to be. Well, I don't know, but from what I've heard, the good old days of,
No, there's no good old days.
But for lack of better words, but
I understand.
Like even like with just the things, like I was saying, like it was her death that really sent me into a downward spiral of just bad habits, unhealthy behavior, like willingly putting myself in very, very dangerous situations, getting involved in an abusive relationship that I ended up pregnant from, which led me to the abortion clinic. But it all really, I was already going down, a bad path, dabbling in this, dabbling in that, being around people I was not supposed to be around, running the streets, being around people, whatever. But it never got to the point of, all of it was dangerous, but it wasn't me being blatantly rebellious and just saying, I don't care about anything, like I can just die with her, which were words that literally would come out of my mouth. Like I just didn't care at that point. And it was really my grandmother that was like my backbone during that whole season. She was the only one for a hot minute that knew about the abortion. I told her beforehand. I found out I was pregnant in her bathroom. She was the first person to know. She never condemned me, never spoke down on me. She always rebuked me in love first. But she always pointed me back to a place of love and back to Christ, and never made me feel like I was too far gone. So during the season of grief being so new to me and losing my biological mother so unexpectedly, because I hadn't spoken to her. I lost her March 7th, 2022. I hadn't spoken to her since the day before Thanksgiving in 2021. And that conversation was not good at all. And unfortunately, I have to...
The last conversation that we had was...
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, I have to live with the last words that I said to the woman who birthed me were very vulgar, hateful, prideful, awful, that should never be said to anyone, let alone your own mother, regardless of what may have happened. And that was it. I mean, we hadn't talked in months, and I got a call that woke me up, and I said hello. And mind you, I just got done going out with my friends at the bar, had a great night, okay? Had a great night in sin. Woke up, I'm hungover. I get a call, hey, your mom is dead. And I'm like, huh? What are we even talking about? Yeah. I had to go to work that day. I called into work. I was working at Hooters at the time. I called into work, and I went over to my sister's apartment, Caitlin, when she still lived here in Birmingham. She lives in Seattle now. And Shelby came over as well. And we were just all making like just dark humor because we didn't know how else to cope through that or even really process it. And then I was the one that had to identify the body and sign paperwork and do this and do that. And it was just this whole thing because she was legally divorced for like a month at that point. I had to call Birmingham Police Department and tell them to close the case that she was the plaintiff in a robbery case, or the victim in. And I just had so much to handle. We never had a funeral or like a celebration of life or anything like that. She was cremated. I never got any of her ashes or remains or anything. I have some of her rings and some of her like little jewelries and trinkets and stuff. And her husband at the time let me go through the house and her things. And I still even have some of her like sweatpants and all kinds of stuff. I had a yard sale. I took whatever I wanted, and like photo albums and stuff like that she had kept. But I mean, I don't have much at all to symbolize all that. I mean, I got a tattoo after the fact, which, whatever. But that was my last tattoo that I had gotten, was 2022. But it was just a lot. And it still is. Like, even in the sense of what you've mentioned, the woman that she was with when I was born. Like, just that whole thing. And then having to contact her. Hadn't spoken to her ever in my entire life. Had heard about her before. Never spoken to her in my entire life. I'm the one that has to break the news of, hey, she's unfortunately passed away.
And
this is what happened. Yeah, and it was
that's actually the message that she sent me was one of the things that I went back and looked at, because I'd never recalled, and if she did tell me through the years, because every time that I would, when we would not see each other, speak to each other for long periods, and then we would catch up, and she would always give me a report on all the girls.
Yeah.
But she always referred to as Jocelyn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My name was still saved in her phone as Jocelyn when she passed. Like, we would literally be in conversation or out in public, and to her, never register the fact that my name has been legally changed. Right. Nobody calls me that. And it was a sensitive topic for me for a hot minute of, I wouldn't tell people, or, I mean, I'm just now able to really, talk about it, that I feel comfortable doing so. All of my friends and people know, don't ever in your life refer to me as Jocelyn. That's just a sensitive topic. That's just what that is. But, I mean, I had her girlfriend's middle name, and I've been told so many stories about how my name even came about. I don't know. I don't think you know. But, yeah, I mean, even to the day that, the last day that we had met, that was my name to her. And I respect that, you were my biological mother. Yeah. You had every right to name me whatever you wanted to. But in the same token, I was only raised by Tiffany. So that was just like, I don't know.
That's when I'm having this epiphany over here that you may be who I think you are. I went back to that message where Tasha had messaged me and said, "Hey, Becky passed away. She overdosed. I just spoke to her ex-husband and her daughter, Tiffany." And at the time, I was just kind of in shock of what I was reading, that it didn't, I didn't
Who's
think,
Tiffany?
Who's Tiffany?
Because, she was pregnant again after me. Did you know that? Yeah.
Yes.
And then
Raven.
I think it was a miscarriage or a stillborn, one of the two.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, that was,
because that was 2005.
I had come back around through that whole season with that guy. But, so I went back going back to when I realized who you were, I went back to that message and I just spoke to her daughter, Tiffany. And that was like, so, but yeah, it didn't really click with me initially because she only referred to as Jocelyn. Yeah.
I mean, even still with the few like transcripts and court notes and things with DHR that I'd seen that she had wrote in, even though my name had been legally changed, she still referred to me as such. And we had talked about that a few times of like, hey, can you call me Tiffany? And she would, it would slip sometimes. But to my face, she would most of the time call me Tiffany. But anytime else, baby, my name was Jocelyn till that's just the story that she would tell always. And my adopted mom has told me a story of like how when they would have court and stuff like that, the reason that she ultimately did not get custody back, because reunification is always the goal with foster care. And thankfully, my adopted parents, who were my foster parents at the time, always have had that goal with every single child that they have fostered. You know, there's some people out here that unfortunately abuse the system and they're like, oh no, this is my kid. And I'm like, whoa, let's not discredit the biological parent may be going through hell and high water. At the very end of the day, the goal should always be reunification. Unfortunately, the system is broken. There's many flaws. There's many things in many cases that they've dropped the ball. But they tried their very best for reunification with me. I was not adopted till I was like 5 or 6. And there was like 3 main things that she had to have for the court date. And, you know, she had supervised visitation for a minute. I know at least up until I was about 2 or 2, I want to say, because we have pictures together at the DHR office and at my daycare and stuff like that. But she needed a job, she needed a place to live, and she needed to pass a drug test. And sometimes she would just get 1 and she would miss 2, or sometimes she would get 2 and just miss 1, but it was never all 3. And then, you know, at the time she was dating another man who wasn't her ex-husband, as we've referred to. And apparently he had like a whole family in a whole nother state, or so. That was my understanding. And that just broke her even more because she was so in love with that man.
Am I Ray?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was just the tell-all be-all after that.
She was crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the ex-husband, he was a marriage of convenience.
Yeah.
But talking about somebody had her crazy.
Yeah. But, yeah, so then they...
You know, I'm going to go back real quick if I can. You said something, you're talking about when you were in your, you know, dealing right after she passed away and you were in rebellion and you were putting yourself in some dangerous places. It made me think when I was describing your mother, you know, I said that she was loving, she was compassionate, she was passionate, but she was also fearless. And she was not scared of anybody.
Nothing.
She would step up. It didn't matter if you were 6'7", she's gonna square up on you. I mean, she was stubborn. You know, she was fearless.
She was a hard body.
She was. She was. And another thing that she would do on the downswing of, you know, having a loving big heart is that she would throw up her hands a lot of times.
Yeah.
And just not care. I don't care. I'm gonna, you know, almost like daring death.
Yeah.
You know, she would never commit suicide intentionally. This just wasn't who she was.
Yeah.
But she would dare, you know, dare God almost to kill me.
Because when she first passed, that we didn't know anything for real. We knew that there was an apparent overdose, but the details were very, very spotty up until like 2-3 weeks after she passed, when we finally were able to access the police report and they released some of her belongings to us. Because it was tricky because me and my two sisters, we were legally adopted by other people. So legally, we are not your children. She had just finalized a divorce about a month before she had passed away. Legally, he's not your husband.
Wait a minute, Caitlin was adopted?
Yeah, by my Mimi and my pop. Yeah, we all were. All of us.
I don't think I realized that with Caitlin. I thought
they mostly would keep her and it would be on and off, but so legally, Caitlin was my mom's sister. Legally.
I don't know that I ever knew that. I thought they just raised her.
No, they completed that one.
Okay.
And then my mom's sister adopted Shelby.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then legally, Shelby was my mom's niece. And then me, baby, I ain't got nothing to do with nobody. But
well, my brother was adopted, and when we found out he was adopted, he was 16 and I was 11, and found out he was actually my cousin.
Oh, okay. Well, period.
So when my mother's sister was 15, she got pregnant with him. Couldn't raise him.
Yeah.
So my mom and dad adopted him and raised us as brothers until he was 16, and then found out that we were actually by blood or cousins. Now, still, he's my brother, and all he'll ever be to me is my brother.
Yeah.
But blood-wise, we're cousins. So we got a little Jerry Springer in us, too.
Yeah. Please. But, I mean, yeah, like, so legally, I couldn't really fault the system. Like, it was a very complex situation. But eventually, her ex-husband and me were able to pick up the police report, and then eventually my sister went back and got some of her belongings that were put into evidence or just held. And then we had went through those and all the things. But even still, like, we had the opportunity to go through her phone up until the day that she had died. And by this point, it had been 8 months, if not a year, since she had passed. And it was just like day one all over again. And just so many things that I wish I had not been exposed to. But I'm glad that I am. I mean, I knew the truth. I know the truth now. But there was just so much more of the worst parts of her that I had to discover, and I had to sit through, and I had to, find out per se. So it was just, I mean, it was a lot. It was a whole lot because I had no idea most of the things. And I'm also not going to sit up here and blast her business because, I mean, God rest her soul. But
exactly. We don't want to, I mean,
yeah,
we
no.
loved her. I loved her.
Yeah.
I knew her for, let's see, she passed in 22.
Mm-hmm.
We met in 97.
Mm-hmm.
How many years is that?
25.
25 years.
Mm-hmm.
The last time that I spoke to her was, and I shared this with you off camera, but
Mm-hmm.
the circumstances around that, and it was not pleasant the last
Yeah.
time we spoke, and I regret that. But it would have been in the August or September of 2000.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last time that we spoke.
Yeah.
So, and I regret that. So when Tasha sent me the message, I dealt with some guilt over that because I did care. I cared a lot about her, and did a lot of things. Even and I tried to minister to her, and she father was a pastor.
Yeah.
So she knew, she was raised in church. She knew the word. She knew the truth. But she was, church hurt, I guess you could say. So she had issues with that. But she knew the truth, and I tried to minister to her, and she saw the goodness of God in my life
Mm-hmm.
throughout the years. Her and Tasha both, and I tried to minister, but then I would screw up and end up, one day I'm preaching Jesus to them, and then the next day I'm getting high with them.
Yeah.
So I kind of ruined my own testimony with them. So I deal with, still today, I feel from time to time the enemy will come at me with guilt about that.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is the truth.
Yeah.
Whether you're telling it when you're getting high or when you're not, truth is the truth.
Yeah.
So she knew the truth, and I believe that she believed the truth. That's my personal belief. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off into that.
No, you're fine.
Again, but I just want to say, I knowing her as well as I did, her death was not intentional.
Yeah.
I can't say anything more than that, but I know her well enough that she didn't mean to overdose.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked a little bit about that and stuff, but unfortunately, and the crazy part about it all is looking back then to where, like I said in the very, very beginning, looking back to where my life was then compared to my life now, and just the intentionality of God, of just even us connecting, or just where God has taken me in my life now, smallest little details, like in one of her mental evaluations that she had with the state when I was born, that she was required by DHR to get, it talks about how she regretted dropping out of school because she wanted to pursue a degree in law. Well, Tiffany works as a paralegal and legal assistant in criminal defense law with no college, no nothing except for just references, people vetting my name, and me just being very good at admin work. Yeah. And so just little things like that, I'll still see and be reminded of the sovereignty of God, as well as just because physically she is not here anymore. There's still so much legacy to be brought forth, and I want to attain to the characteristics that she had of the best parts of her, because she had so many good parts.
She did.
And that's just who she was. She was very passionate about any and everything, especially animals. But the Miami Dolphins, because of Pop, and just she has glass little dolphins. And I saw one when I was in West Palm Beach, Florida, preaching at the airport, and it just made me almost fall out in the floor because she had 3 of them for me, Caitlin, and Shelby. And so then I was just like, oh my goodness. And then, the topic, and we're closing, but the topic of people will ask me, do I ever regret me not letting her meet Amaya, my daughter? Because she never got the opportunity to. Once again, me being ignorant, not understanding addiction and things like that. I'm also 18 years old, okay? Trying to just scavenger through motherhood as a whole, on top of me still being a child myself and just that whole situation. I was like, no, you need to pass the drug test to be around my kid. I'm so sorry. I also didn't know then that she would pass away when my child was 1.5. I had no idea. I never saw my mom dying.
But just like your adopted parents, you were trying to protect your daughter.
Yeah.
You do the best you can do. You were doing the best of what you had at the time, and you didn't know, and you could have never known that.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that but God.
Right.
Right. And I know we're closing. I want to say this before we run out of time. I don't want you to shut the door on me.
No, you're fine.
But so since I've realized who you were, I do see a lot of your mother in you, a lot of the good parts. Obviously, she was very intelligent. You just talked about that, that she was intelligent. She did have desires and dreams and goals, and she could have attained them if she had been able to get free from addiction. She could have, no doubt about it, because she was driven in everything she did. And I see that in you. I think you're driven, and I appreciate that. And I'm so grateful and thankful that you have decided to serve the Lord. I think you honor not only her, but your grandfather, the entire family by doing that. I think that's so honoring. And as a friend, a long-term friend of your mother's, I'm proud of you for the decisions that you've made and the path that you're taking. And I'm just excited about what God's doing right now, and can't wait to see what he's going to do through you in the future. And I know that so many lives have been impacted by your testimony and by your ministry. And I'm grateful to be just a small part of it, and just to sit on the sidelines and watch it.
Yeah.
I know your mom's proud of you too.
Well, to God be the glory. I could not tell you why, of all people, I feel like growing up, and even still sometimes, I feel like the runt out of a puppy litter, the most counted out, disqualified, this don't make no sense. And he's an unconventional God in the sense of he will use foolery for his glory. It talks about it in Proverbs. I forget the exact verbiage of the scripture. Something around God will use foolish things to confound the wise. Something
He
along
uses the simple to confound the wise.
Yeah. And so it was that's literally just my life. It makes no sense why I'm in the position that I'm in today. It makes no sense how I have the wisdom that I do. I don't have an education past the 9th grade that's completed. Or how I'm in my right mind or able to still cope and not falling into those same patterns and still being alive after all of the things that I have done, and still being covered by grace and mercy, even when I had announced my decision to follow Christ and surrender my life to him, but still in flesh, being purged out of things, was still involved in certain things. It's just crazy to me. It just don't make no sense. But I do know at the very end of the day, my mom was proud of me even when she was alive. And I was a hellion. So I can just imagine now, even with my grandmother, my gamma, just the way that they would sing from the rooftops. And even in my lowest moments, still being there for me and having my back 500%.
Now, are you dramatic?
Oh, very. You didn't know?
I figured.
Okay.
I figured.
Yes, very dramatic.
Becky was a little dramatic as well.
Very dramatic. We would bump heads a whole lot.
Yeah.
A whole lot. But yeah, there's just a lot about my mom that I knew briefly that I see in myself, good and bad, that the Lord has, used for his glory, as well as is still purging and pruning. But I don't think being dramatic is a bad thing. But I'm very passionate. That's what she was saying.
If I call you Becky one day, you gonna slap me?
No. She would do that all the time. My Mimi would do that. If you start getting
dramatic on me, I'm gonna call you Becky.
No, my Mimi would do it. My sisters have done it. We were the most alike out of the whole group. It just simple and plain. Like, and that's why we would just get into it like we did. But yeah, so I mean, I received a lot of answers, as well as I'm sure there's many, many more. I mean, we can't fit it all into one episode, and a lot of things just don't need to be recorded anyways, because I do,
we don't want to dishonor her.
Exactly. Just that use of discretion, but also the beauty of her life and the fact that her life gave me life regardless of the situation.
Well, that's God's redeeming plan,
of
right?
course.
Come on. I mean,
of course.
Romans 8:28, right? I was talking to Jacob about it earlier before you got here. That everything, all things
work together.
Even broken, addicted. I mean, you look through the entire Bible. We could go on. We could do a whole other show.
Noah was a drunk.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Rahab was a prostitute.
You are a testimony to a redemptive God.
Yeah.
And come on, glory. That's and I'm done. I'm going to turn myself off. Thank you for having me on your show.
Everybody say thank you, Rodney. We love you, Rodney. Woo!
Peace.
But yeah, I'm proud I didn't cry. Yay! I was trying my best to hold it together.
I'm still on the mic. I probably cried more than you did.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure when I leave, but not from a sense of, like sadness or heaviness or grief, but just for the sense of there's so much about my mom that I didn't know. And as I learned more, coming to the realization of I can find out more in a past tense, but I'll never have that like present tense as long as we're here on earth. Now, do I believe, like we had said in the beginning, like she knew the Lord, she had a relationship with God. I'm not the judge or the jury to say what happened. Because we've had this conversation. Like only that person within themselves can confidently answer that question, yes or no. Because salvation is a gift. It's not, yes, we are called to live holy. Holiness is forever, right? Let's please be plain and clear. But, I mean, we truly never know. So, yeah, I mean, I have full confidence that hopefully, prayerfully, if it's in the Lord's will, that I will meet my mother again one day. And like I say, it's like in the book, like there will be no more pain, no more sorrow, no more grief. We won't be in our natural bodies. And even still, I don't believe that then with the concept of, how it talks about in the Bible, like when we go to heaven, we're not married anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, is it still in the sense, because we're all just like brothers and sisters of Christ. Is that in the sense also of like, from your understanding of like mother and daughter, or... I don't know. I'm going to go research that one. But I'm a big nerd when it comes to like technicalities of stuff.
So yeah, nobody will be given in marriage in heaven. There will not be the husbands and wives in marriage, but will you recognize someone as being your former husband or wife, or being your mother or daughter, even though that now we're operating under the sense of we're only brothers and sisters in Christ. And then even then, is there going to be Are there genders in heaven, or are we all spiritual beings?
Girl,
is there a female spirit? I mean, the Bible talks about the angels that I know of all being men.
Yeah.
It's just refers to them as men. I don't know. I'm saying these are questions that I don't think anybody can confidently answer.
Yeah.
About that.
Because I mean, there's a lot of times in Scripture to refer to like man, but in the sense of like mankind. So then it's like, okay, what are we talking about?
Right.
Yeah. But and then when the Bible was interpreted from Greek and Hebrew to, a lot of people refer back to the King James Version being the first one. Even the King James Version is a broken English. Like, simple. It's a broken English dialect. That's like, I like New King James, but King James sometimes, baby, it be confusing me. Like, therefore, okay, now we got to go back. Because that's a synopsis of there's something before. And
you might get some backlash to this from some of your viewers, but just because something's the first doesn't mean it's the best.
Right. And that's true.
That's all I'm going to say.
I mean, that is true. But
and I was raised on the King James, and I study out of the New King James, but I love several other versions.
Oh, of course.
Well. I'm not, and we're going to get onto a whole nother show. I'm not a King James is the only authorized version.
Yeah.
Well, it's the only one authorized by King James. But that doesn't mean it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I'm going to stop.
Trolling.
You're
just trolling. He's a troll. But, I mean, that's it. That's all. When this is posted, it'll be 3 years. And I'm grateful for the growth that has happened in 3 years, as well as her memory not dying in the past 3 years, and me having the honor ultimately to carry on her legacy and just tell people about who she was, bring awareness to addiction, bring understanding and clarity that I did not have when she was still here and when I was a product of addiction, and then was born into it myself. But still, even in all of it, the goodness and the glory of God, the faithfulness of God to use such an unconventional being, a broken vessel, someone who was destined for premature death and going down the same path and repeating the generational curse. That's just who God is. And the same way that he did it for me, the same way he can do it for the next person or whoever is listening to this or whoever's watching this, whatever the case may be, that's just who God is. And I feel like today's episode really encamped a lot of that, and also put the focus of we are very imperfect people, striving to be perfected by a perfect God every single day. None of what any of us do could be done by our own power or our own strength or understanding alone, because then we're set up for failure. We're fleshly beings, saved and sanctified and filled with the Holy Ghost. But even still, we still have free will and things of that nature. And we were born into sin. So I'm grateful for the blood of Jesus. I'm grateful for redemption.
Me too.
I'm grateful that just because a story may have started some way, God has the final say. He knows the beginning from the end. He's the author and the finisher of all of our stories. So I'm just grateful for all of that, and I'm thankful that you listened to today's episode. We did go over a little bit. Of course, we love you, Rodney. But that is it for today's episode. Go back and watch the other ones if you have not already. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And until next time.